Hi, and welcome to Clearing the Pathway for Healing and Policing in America. I'm Evan Barbie. I'm a certified Narrative Enneagram teacher and trained coach. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been deeply involved with the Enneagram in my own personal life for over a decade and currently work in private practice as a coach and volunteer in the prison system as an educator for incarcerated women. So I am very privileged to serve on the board of TNE and am current chair of the programming committee. And I have with me today a good friend and a colleague, Chief Mike Alexander. So to tell you a little bit about Mike before we get started, Mike's background is pretty extensive. He's done a lot of work in his life in some really important fields that concern us all today. His background is he received a BA in criminal justice and an MA in organizational leadership, and is trained as a life and leadership coach. He spent, Mike, it's 40 years nearly in law enforcement, serving in different capacities, both as an officer for many, many years, and then later chief of police and city manager in several cities across Texas. You've worked extensively with the DOJ. You're now deeply involved in organizational and leadership development, working with agencies who've experienced some type of crisis, and really kind of diving into building leadership and ethics curriculums across the United States, working with these agencies. So you're the founder of Lion, which is an organizational development institute, and you have a really important message to share with the world today. And the point of this experience is to really move the Enneagram into real life and show how the Enneagram can be used to span gaps in society, to reach different populations and really begin facilitating a healing process. So welcome to the experience, Mike. We're so lucky to have you. And is there anything that I missed in that intro that you'd like to share?
No, I was actually tuned out to that intro. I don't listen to my bio, but thank you very much for the invite.
You're so welcome. So the topic for discussion today is really about illustrating how the Enneagram has been used by individuals like yourself to applied to kind of real life topics where there are divisions or divides among people, and we're using that to kind of shift culture in a way. And so you have been using this with law enforcement and police officers. And we're going to get into kind of your history and how you got introduced to the Enneagram and everything that you've used to kind of build this program you're now sharing with the world. Before we do that, this is traditional for all the Narrative Enneagram experiences. We're just going to do a little grounding practice because we live very busy lives. There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of stress that we're under in normal circumstances, but these are abnormal times. So it's especially important in engaging in difficult conversation like the one we're going to have that's incredibly complex, to take extra precautions and kind of ground ourselves and work with our own thoughts, feelings, and kind of reactions in the body. Okay, so everyone, wherever you're joining us, take a comfortable seat. And we're just going to move the attention inside. So sometimes it's good to just feel yourself grounded in your chair and let your eyes close and let your back be supported, and just begin to follow the breath in and down. all the way down to the lowest part of the belly. Just feel the belly expand and contract on each inhale and exhale. And see if you can rest your attention on that feeling. The body center, the instinctual center in Enneagram theory, is one of kind of support and instinct and our sense of power and autonomy. So see if you can just relax into that belly center, feel yourself being supported. And feel the strength and structure of your body supporting you. Move the attention up to the heart space. Follow the breath up to the heart space. This is our ability to connect into the relational field, to kind of reach each other in the emotional sense, tap into the emotions of other people and into our own. And what we want to cultivate here is a sense of gratitude that we have this tool called the Enneagram, that we have a community of people who are using this in their own practice and sharing it with others who need it. Move your attention up to the thinking center, the space between your eyebrows, kind of this intuitive capacity we all hold. And see if you can use the breath to relax the mind a bit. What can you drop? What ideas can you let go of? What preconceived notions can you relax and make space for something that perhaps you didn't know before? What can you discover? Invite in a sense of curiosity. And use the breath to trace this line through these three intelligence centers, all the way down to the body, through the heart space, up into the mind. And see if you can just relax and open that channel a little bit more. Take a couple more deep breaths, and when you're ready, come back to the call. I do that practice as much for me as for anybody else. So thank you for participating. So I want to kind of set the stage a little bit, Mike, for this conversation, for you to kind of share the work that you do in the world and acknowledge the fact that when we talk about dysfunction in police departments or officers who've engaged in violence, there is an injured party on the other side. And, you know, this really invites us to kind of tap into that principle of the Enneagram that has just really meant so much to me, called the Law of Three. And in that system, in that kind of inner triangle in the Enneagram symbol, we're talking about three different creation forces. There's the active or affirming force moving one way, and at the bottom of that triangle, the receptive or denying force moving the opposite way. And we can see this at work in the world. This is kind of a system for violence. We have two parties moving opposite directions. And what the Enneagram invites us into is to get in touch with something we're usually blind to, which is that reconciling force that is indicative of a bigger field when both of these parties can ground, no matter what they're feeling, can kind of ground in their experience and relax. This larger kind of field comes in that reconciles these two parties together. And this is a very difficult thing to put into practice. So I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. And this is also something you're quite aware of because you've dedicated your life to moving into dysfunctional environments and meeting officers who, are in kind of a combative or reactive state. And we're going to get some good insight into why that's the case. But for everybody kind of on this call, we're each going to do our own individual work to just ground and relax and remind ourselves that although this might be a difficult topic, we're coming together to have a really meaningful conversation. So we really hope to illustrate, like I said, how the Enneagram can heal wounds. What, in your perspective, Mike, are kind of the necessary principles that we need to practice in order for both parties to come together and meet in the middle and have a conversation?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to be able to respect both sides. The denying force and the affirming force. We need to be able to respect each other. And part of the problem here, when you see the civil unrest in our society, is that neither side is respecting the other side, and both need equal time and attention. And no one is willing to give up their silo. And until we are ready to do that, we're going to continue to have this vicious cycle of civil unrest and just chaos in our society. And I always talk about the police being that thin line between order and chaos, and we really can be the reconciling force if we really recognize the power that we possess in society. And I always look at it's a biblical principle, but the word meekness, and meekness means power under control, and that's really us. That's a police officer. If we really looked at things the right way, we supposed to be the walking example of what society is supposed to look like, because we possess the ability to give life and take life. At a moment's notice, we can change the course of another person's life. That's tremendous power. And we've been given that power by who? Our citizens. It's given us that power. And what you often find is when there's civil unrest, it's because community is no longer willing to put up with some of the things that they have given us the authority to do. We have misused the power in which they have given us. And so until we're ready to drop our egos and attitudes and come to that middle, we're going to continue to have this conflict.
And that's just about, like I said, the most difficult thing in the world to do, is for both parties who feel very justified, to relax and step into a dynamic that is scary, and do it from a position of being undefended. That is difficult work. So let's talk about your experience, like where you came from. If you don't mind sharing the type that you lead with, give us a little context on your life.
Well, I was born and raised in a small town in Florida, Central Florida. I grew up as a migrant worker, where I traveled 6-7 states per year throughout my entire childhood until I was 18 years of age when I came to Texas. But I'm a social six. So early in life, I picked up that need for safety and security, and I have lived in that environment for my entire life. But I came to know the Enneagram through a very good friend and colleague and co-worker many years ago by the name of Rick Bradstreet, Dr. Rick Bradstreet, there in Austin PD. I was working there. I retired from Austin PD after 26 years almost there. And Dr. Bradstreet was the police psychologist. And I'll never forget when the chief of police called me and asked me questions around some of the things that were going on within Austin PD. And at that time, we had an onslaught of alcohol related issues, and they were creating all types of issues. And so he called and said, "Hey, uh, can you explain?" And the reason he reached out to me is because of the work I was doing with DOJ, with consent decrees, around consent decrees, and all in agencies that were having conflict and issues with the community. They were usually around civil rights violations, excessive force, um, negligent retention. It's a litany of things that were happening. And that's how I called Rick, and Rick and I began to work on a curriculum that we end up calling Hidden Hazards, to introduce a concept and a process to police officers and how to pick up and address subtle dysfunctional behavior within your police officers. And at that time, Rick introduced the Enneagram to all of us, but he didn't call it the Enneagram. He didn't call it anything, actually. He just began to talk about it. And it piqued my curiosity. And I began to ask questions. Instead of him just outright answering the questions, he asked me to come to a workshop. I did. And I was dumbfounded afterwards, because it spoke so much to me, and it was like something I've been looking for my entire life. And that's the beginning of my journey within the Enneagram, and I just gravitated towards it at that point, and just took a deep dive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Rick Bradstreet, who I know and I'm a big fan of, he actually introduced the two of us for a project here in Nashville. So he introduced you to the Enneagram, although he didn't use that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about this system that really reached you? What did you see kind of illustrated in the Enneagram?
Well, I saw the security points. I saw the stress points. I saw the security points, and I saw what an officer looked like when they're stressed out. And it began to really speak. And that's exactly what we were teaching, the stress point. What happens to an officer when their nervous system is hijacked and they lose themselves in a situation. And I always say that two people involved in a conversation, or even if it's conflictual, that they cannot go crazy at the same time. And when two people go crazy at the same time, that's chaos. And the police officer cannot afford to go crazy. They cannot afford to allow their nervous system to be hijacked, because the moment they do, they lose themselves. And that is where excessive force and unethical behavior begin to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my introduction. And that was the thing that really began to resonate with me in such a way that I started teaching it in every workshop I taught. Enneagram was always the foundational piece.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Bradstreet became a mentor for you in that regard. You began kind of doing trainings with T&E and getting involved in this community.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you had this light bulb go off from personal experience. Can you speak a little bit to like what you experienced as a young officer
Mm-hmm.
in an agency?
Sure. You know, the whole time we were teaching our police officers, I created a model. That model was somewhat my life, what I looked like coming into the profession, how I changed and why I changed, and what was some things going on with me personally, and what was some of the things happening professionally. Um, and it was those things that really woke me up, uh, because of the stress points that the Enneagram introduced to me, helped me to understand, especially the third stage I'll talk about here in just a second, of that model. But that's where all of the stress began to truly manifest itself and start coming out in very dysfunctional ways. And that was me probably for my first 9 years within the profession. Excuse me. There were peak points where I was very unhealthy. Now, looking at me, you couldn't tell that um, because I was being praised at work because of my type structure and where I go when I'm stressed. Um, it looked to be what they wanted: hard charger, high producer. And that was something that the agency, my supervisors, just kept feeding praises towards me. And what I was really doing because of that, I was spiraling deeper and deeper into this black hole. And for me, the Enneagram was a part of what woke me up. And then a simple paradigm shift. And the shift was me leaving patrol and going to another program within the police department, which is called, back then we had a DARE program, drug education. And at that point, I began to see society differently. As a
In
patrol,
what way?
well, as a patrol officer, I saw police officers and the adversary. It was the us versus them. When I went into
That dualistic system. Yeah.
exactly right. And when I went into the school system and started working with kids, I saw a completely different world. And I'm saying, my God, what happened to me? Who was that guy? And so that just caused me to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the Enneagram. And so I everything I can pick up to read, I read, and I start going to the workshops in Menlo and meeting phenomenal people who were also immersed in the same world in which I was immersed in. And, I just woke up. The beauty of it too, Evan, is, you still have those ebbs and flows. I think we all do. And the key, though, is awareness. And when you're trending in a bad place, and you know what to do to bring yourself out of those things. That's the beauty of the Enneagram. And that's one of the things that the Enneagram has really introduced to me.
Well, I think anybody who's familiar with the Enneagram had some type of similar experience where you just were able to step outside of a conditioned pattern and observe how that pattern can sweep you away, and at a certain point you're powerless to it, So I love that working with that DARE program and working with kids is really what shifted your perspective in such a powerful way. So you came back and had the Enneagram. You began kind of equipping yourself with different tools. I know that ACEs study is pretty fundamental in what you use. That's Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And you're really current on a lot of trauma theory. And so you have this multifaceted understanding of the challenges that are present in policing agencies. And you began developing a model. But I want to shift for a second back again to the law of three. If you don't mind sharing your screen, I know you have a couple of slides to illustrate how you've used the law of three and adapted it for kind of policing.
Yes, this is just my perspective of the law of three, how I use the Enneagram, and some of the things that have just come my way. Let me share it.
I don't see it yet.
Here we go.
There we go.
So this is just things that I've learned over the years. But the law of three, as I begin to think about this whole piece and civil unrest and the Enneagram and the power of the Enneagram and how I use the Enneagram, I start thinking about just the things that you mentioned earlier about the law of three. That was phenomenal. to hear that we're thinking about the same thing. But the denying force is our police departments. The affirming force right now, the protesters, and both are trying to get a voice. And so what we, and I own a company called Lion Strategy Group, which has taken the Lion Institute and merged it into the Lion Strategy Group. And so the title of this thing today is really the reconciling force, clearing the pathway for healing and policing in America. And so what we're trying to do is just give everybody, both sides, an opportunity to meet us in that space, the reconciling space, where healing on both sides can occur, because there's trauma on both sides right now. And the only way it's going to change is we come there in the middle and begin to work with it. But Marion Gilbert, who I love like no other, in the most recent newsletter, this is just some things, some excerpts of her work. She said, by the nature of our human experience, we are partially obscured in being able to see the reality as it actually is. And she goes on to say that it is an either or reality. So you look at the denying force and the affirming force. It's either or reality. We are largely not in touch with the third force. That's the reconciling force. We don't even think about the reconciling force when our nervous system is hijacked. I am the affirming force. I am the denying force. I'm right. And so therefore, we never consider the reconciling force. She goes on to say that this create a divide and conquer platform of reality, as I just stated. And the reconciling force can only be actualized by giving equal attention to the affirming and denying forces. And what's such profound information to really speak to what's happening in our society right now. When you think about the police departments who are standing and for as they're concerned, they're holding the line. And the affirming force are telling us that we are wrong, that there are some injustices, and they want to be heard. No one is willing to hear the other. You know, from an organizational development perspective, there's a guy by the name of Dr. James Farr. He's passed on now, but he basically said that there are 3 systems in every organization. And as a chief of police and an administrator, I spent the last part of my career as that administrative piece, which is the head type, and we're all about facts. So I put out policy, I wrote core values, guiding principles. I wrote what my agency was supposed to be about. I put it out there, and then the operational technical piece is really the boots on the ground. So if you look at it from a police perspective, they are the guys in the field doing the work that I mandated. But the human part is the heart center. And that is the piece that police officers have turned off. We have turned off our emotions. And so we have lost our ability to have compassion for people. We are deathly afraid of vulnerability. And so in order to survive, we felt the need, and it wasn't intentional, to turn off the emotional part of the 3 centers. And as you know, and I know, in order to reconcile, all 3 need to be present. And so you look at the infinity symbol. I love this symbol to show where reconciliation should meet there in the middle. And that's the beauty of what the Enneagram also, when you think about that law of 3, that's what it does. It brings us to a place where reconciliation can actually occur.
That's
Uh,
beautiful, Mike. I mean, it's such a powerful concept. And like you said, it's foreign. You know, this, nobody tells us this growing up. Nobody explains that this isn't even an option. We kind of grow up in a society where people are really polarized. And you can turn on the news and see this all over the place. It's in politics, it's in society. You know, this is the way we've kind of always operated. And it really drives people further apart.
yes,
So acknowledging damage on both sides, you know, which is difficult to do. The, and part of that difficulty being the damage in agencies that people don't even know is happening.
right.
That's really an expression of deeper dysfunction in our entire culture, you know. So recognizing that, you know, it can be summed up in that old saying, hurt people hurt people.
Right. That's exactly right.
I know that from working in the prison system, you know. And once those individuals are equipped, kind of humanized first, and equipped to use tools like the Enneagram, magnificent change occurs.
Right.
So you took this information and you built what you call the police life cycle model. Again, this was based on your own experience, but also after doing thousands of interviews with officers in agencies across the nation.
Correct.
Can you just tell us really briefly what that model describes?
Well, I kind of talked about it briefly. It shows, and there's, you know, like the first three stages. That first stage is what I call idealistic. A police officer walk into a police department for the first time, and they're very idealistic. They all come in, for the most part, wanting to help and want to do right by society. And so they chose a helping profession. They're very confident about their values, but their confidence is naive because they don't know what they don't know. And what they don't know is the subculture. They don't understand the assumptions, the toxicity within that subculture, and that is the piece that will eventually take hold of them. But that's usually around 2 years or so before that happens. They're very idealistic around the first 2 or so years. And then they move into another stage, which is the second stage, is I call settling in. They come in, they settle. And when they settle, um, they at that point, they kind of understand the pecking order. They see things that they appreciate, but they see things that they don't appreciate. And that's on both sides. This is the stage also where they begin to lose their connection with their emotion. This is where they begin to, in a very subtle way, lose compassion. This is where vulnerability begin to fly out the window.
So this is really adapting and being assimilated in to the culture as it exists.
Right. Yes,
Mhm.
that's the socializing component. This is where officers who have taken hold of this cop and begin to socialize them into the subculture. And so I also call this like a psychological transformation, is where we begin to walk the talk of those that are around us. And so at this point, in a very subtle way, we become normal people, abnormal circumstances, behaving very abnormally, and that's normal. So this is where all of the abnormality began to creep into our souls, but we don't know it. We have no idea that our nervous system is under attack. And if we're not careful, it will eventually take control of us.
What this brings up for me, I mean, I'm feeling this as you're talking about it because this was my story from childhood, moving into my family of origin, where there
Mhm.
was all kinds of trauma and dysfunction and violence and addiction. And as a child who comes in kind of open-hearted, you have to find a way to survive.
Right.
So beginning to find a sense of belonging by developing a survival strategy is this parallel you're describing in my own experience with the Enneagram and what you observed in policing.
Right. Exactly right. And then that
Yeah.
third stage is the frustration stage. That is the stage. They're 3, 5, somewhere around there years in the business by now, and they begin to get angry at seemingly inconsequential things. Um, this is where um, they're either going to explode or at some point shortly thereafter, an implosion will take place. So those are the first three stages. That's at a very high level in talking about them. There's so many different twists and turns and nuances to each of those stages that happens. And every time I teach this, Evan, there are probably 4, 5, 10 officers that are triggered by what I'm saying, and I get almost confessionals. During the break, somebody will come up to me and start asking questions. And I know that they're talking about themselves, and some of them will come out and say it. And so some of the stories that I've heard are so profound that I've asked them to allow me to record their story. And I have. And I have tons of video footage of police officers talking about their journey as it relates to the life cycle. And, I came about this through just DOJ work, going, if I'm in Burlington, Vermont, or somewhere in Key West, Florida, Sacramento, California, or somewhere in North Carolina, in all points in between, the language was the same. And every police officer could resonate or relate to the information that I was providing.
Mm-hmm. So I have one question just to clarify. You talked about the lower point of stage 3, there's an explosion, which is kind of acting out. And you said implosion. What might that look like?
Well, the implosion actually happens as they enter that fourth stage, and that's called hitting
Mm-hmm.
wall. That's the burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't talked about, but I can talk about the 4 R's. The first
Okay.
R is what I call resistance. That really happens. It really starts in the latter stages of stage 2. And that's resistance. It's in the mind. You're not showing any outward signs of dysfunction. You're thinking a lot of things. You're being disappointed by the things that you're seeing, both in
Mm-hmm.
society and in the police department. You're seeing police officers who are supposed to exemplify integrity who aren't. And then you're seeing community members who are just doing all kind of egregious things to one another. And you're stuck right there in the middle watching this and have to deal with both. So the resistance start happening. And then the second stage, which is in the latter part of the early stages of frustration, is called resentment. And that is it's actually an active part of resistance, meaning you start acting out, you start doing things, you start saying things. This is where the manifestation of the us versus them actually takes place. And so in order to survive, sometimes the police officer, and I call this crowded isolation. In other words, I am present, you see me, but in order for me to survive, I'm not here. I'm not here.
Hmm.
And so my emotions are gone. And that's why you see uses of force, excessive force. That's why you see alcoholism in policing. That's in excess. That's why every 54 hours or so, there's a police officer commit suicide. And so it's because of the subtle change that began to happen to them over time. And then that third R is rejection. This is a true turn off of your emotions. They're gone. And if you think about the whole Minneapolis situation in Chauvin, That was exactly him. If you can recall how he looked as he leaned on the neck of George Floyd, you saw no emotion in his face. Why? And
Unfeeling.
he's there saying, I can't breathe. He felt nothing. Why? Because he had no emotion. He had no compassion for anybody. It was true us versus them at that stage. And his cohorts were there also, and they were the same place. Although you had two very young cops who had just became police officers, one of them actually said, can we turn him on his side? And Chauvin said, no. And so they went on as we typically do. And nobody says a word about what happened. But this time the world saw it.
Well, you're describing, I just feel affected by what you reported, because when the intelligence of our heart center goes offline, we lose the ability to understand the impact we're making on other people.
That's right.
And what we're receiving from them. It is a armored, dangerous place to be. We become a danger to ourselves and everybody else.
That's right. And a police officer cannot afford to do that. So that is my passion. So, I mean, like right now, I'm down in South Texas, in the hotbed of COVID-19 in Texas. In fact, the governor is here right now doing a press conference somewhere in this area because of the COVID virus. But 3 weeks or so ago, 2 police officers were killed down here responding to a domestic. And the police chief in a neighboring city just took over, and he recognized the volatile nature of things happening. So he called me down to come and work with his police department. So for 2 weeks, I will be here without going home, working within the police department this week. And next week, I'm in the community, working with the community to try to bring those two forces together. And then the third week, I'll come back mid-September and do training of the information discovered in the police department and in the community. And what I intend to do, of course, is introduce the Enneagram to show the officers how dysregulated they are and why they're so angry with the community, and it's not justified in being so. And I can almost assure you that I will trigger only God knows how many as I introduce this life cycle in the Enneagram to all of them on that third week. That's an exciting week for me, because not that I enjoy triggering people, but I do enjoy them becoming self-aware. And I always have resources available. So I have people like Dr. Bradstreet on speed dial. So when I do trigger, I immediately connect them with someone that can start helping them to understand what's going on with them. Because what happens next, Evan, is they go into this sense of awareness, which is the 5th stage of this model. And there's 6 things that happen to them. Because most of the times, if you think about, is it Riso, Hudson's work, the levels of development, that stage 4, that 4th level, I call that for a police officer autopilot, and they're in autopilot. So they kind of turn off a lot of things as they decline. And so they're unhealthy. So in stage 5, they wake up. And the first thing that happens to them is they become shocked. They're shocked because of their past and the things that they were involved in. And then it's sorrow. And what's great about that is the heart is coming back.
Grief, yeah.
Yes, the heart is coming back to them. And then they struggle. They start struggling with themselves, trying to deny, trying to fight, trying to make it go away. And then the beauty of the next stage is surrender. When they surrender, then you start seeing a different person. And I always tell police chiefs and leaders, when a police officer is at that stage, you may see tears which we typically don't share or shed. And when that happens, I tell the officer who is sitting in a private space with that police officer who is at that stage of surrender. If he start crying, I said, let it happen. Don't stop it. And at the end of it, you ask a question. Tell me about those tears. And see, what you're doing is taking them through that journey of that pain. They have to go through it in order to come to the next stage of what I call transformation. And so it's a beautiful thing to watch a police officer become that meek person again, meaning I have tremendous power, but it's under control. And then that final stage is service. And now they're using themselves for the service of police departments and the profession. And there's a young man that I recently met. He was a commander in a police department in New Mexico, who, when he retired, he was addicted to opioids and a raging alcoholic. And that is some of the dysfunctional things that this profession would do to some police officers. And now he tells his story, and he's very transparent around it. And so he's right now in that service. He's transformation service. He's teetering between those two. And it's a beautiful thing to watch him. And he gets emotional every time. And he triggers so many people during those workshops. But that's...
I mean, you've used that tagline in conversations we've had, both publicly with some of the discussions you're leading. And, when you came to Nashville and we approached the sheriff's office here, your tagline was restoring the integrity to the profession. And that is a beautiful way to sum up what you're describing. That's your work in a nutshell, is restoring the original function of policing back to what it should be. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about how officers have responded. You talk about them getting triggered initially, which I understand that because I've worked with ex-military personnel, and part of the training and conditioning is, out of that heart space, toughen up. Don't let them see you sweat, that type of mentality. Don't be vulnerable, So I always expect some resistance on the front end. But when this clicks with an agency, what do you see happen?
Well, I see, like I said, really true transformation. There's nothing better than a supervisor who understands the emotionality of a person. You start seeing what a police officer is really designed to be, is a guardian and not a warrior. So when you think about it from that perspective, we use words like operator, which is a warrior. And that's our SWAT guys. They love that hard charging, high producing kind of stuff instead of guardian. And police officers are guardians and not warriors. Now there's a warrior contained within me. And that warrior only comes out when necessary. If there's a conflict in society where society is being threatened or harmed, I come out, the warrior comes out, it deals with the threat, it stops the threat. And as soon as that threat is over, the warrior goes back to where it's supposed to be until I need it again. Instead of living a life as a warrior where I am hyper vigilant all the time. That's dangerous. And that's why so many of us crash and burn. And so to see police officers who have been introduced to the Enneagram and they understand when the nervous system is under attack and has been hijacked or about to be hijacked, I just enjoy watching them mentor and guide younger officers who are using words like warrior and operator and very aggressive tones and have this very aggressive command presence, their dark sunglasses and all of those things that exemplify I am authority. And you can be all of those things without doing any of what I just described as a person of authority. So that's the beauty of the work, because what it does is it create a healthy work environment where you begin to see four things happening in organization. You see fairness, and that's a relative term because my fair is not your fair, but you see fairness. You see people really trying to be fair on both sides. You also see transparency on all sides. You see people are willing to speak up and speak out about issues that they see happening to other officers when officers are crossing the line. You see another officer willing to step into that space and pull them out of a situation that they're about to get themselves into. And you also see, you don't see favoritism, you see neutrality. And that's the four things that and we sort of call that procedural justice, where everything is fair and equitable. And the Enneagram, again, speaks to all of that when it's utilized appropriately. And of course, we're talking at a very high level. So there's so many different, as you know, twists and turns, and the well is deep when it comes to the Enneagram. And there's so many things and strategies I utilize in the workplace when I'm using the Enneagram. I mean, I can teach it for weeks on end, but I only use it for one day, for the most part, in a 3-week, actually a 3-month leadership academy that I present. And that first day is foundational, and I give a very high level part of the Enneagram, but the next 3 weeks, every day practically for the next 3 months that I'm in contact with them, that's all they talk about is the Enneagram and the discovery.
That's amazing. So we're going to continue the conversation a little bit. For everyone kind of tuning into this experience, I want to say really quickly, you're going to have an opportunity to ask Chief Mike any questions. And if you would like to do that, you can drop that into the Q&A function at the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be answering those in a few minutes. So go ahead and send your questions in. I want to shift back again, Mike, to the benefit and what you see as possible in this kind of restorative movement that you're at the very front of. You're kind of a thought leader in this space, in your industry. When it comes to resilience and self-regulation, which I have personal experience of the Enneagram being useful in my life in this way. Tell me a little bit about why this is such a necessary piece for law enforcement to focus on right now, this resilience training.
Well, because as a person who believes and understands resilience, there are ebbs and flows, right? There's ups and downs, and in policing, there's ups and downs constantly, but there's a resilient zone. And a resilient officer will stay within that zone. So you're up because you got charged, and then you go down, there's a release. And then you're up again, and then you're down. And what happens to police officers when they're not resilient, they get dysregulated, and then they get stuck in a hyper vigilant state because of a trigger or past trauma, or sometimes it's a combination of both. And as you mentioned, the ACEs, sometimes police officers come into the profession with those ACEs and they don't know it. They have no clue. And what's so great about this profession in a roundabout way is when you know what you're looking at and someone is triggered because of past trauma, you know what to do in dealing with them. And so when I trigger someone, I take them back. I start asking questions. I want to know, how deep is this well? Is it ACEs that's going on? And so I start looking for those adverse things and in conjunction with the current event. But they can get stuck in that hypervigilant state, or they can get stuck in a depressive state. And they actually look almost the same. Just, you really can't tell the difference until you start engaging the person and see that it could be a depressed state. But they still can be very aggressive in either state of mind. And the key is recognizing either or, and then getting them back to that resilient zone. So I spend In fact, I'm working with a police department in the north, in the Dallas Metroplex, where every officer in that police department is going through a series of trainings around resilience. So I teach an 8-hour course to the line level guys, the boots on the ground, the guys on the streets, to help them understand the importance of resilience and self-regulation and self-awareness. But the supervisors go through a 3-day workshop, because not only do I want them to understand what I taught the younger guys on the streets, but I also want them to know what they see when they are seeing what they see, and then what to do about the things that they are experiencing or observing, both the what I call the actual and the perceived. Because sometimes it's a gut instinct that I believe this officer is heading in a bad space. And you can step into a space and begin to work with them on their stuff. And so I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's the work I do around resilience.
Yeah, you do, absolutely. So what you're describing is kind of being in this hyper arousal state where your nervous system is in fight mode. You know, you're threatened, living in a threatening world, a world that you perceive as threatening. So all manner of reactive responses happen,
Right.
and you're training agencies to actually recognize that before it gets to a fever pitch, before somebody actually gets hurt, or they hurt themselves, or they hurt their families,
Right.
because there's a lot of secondary trauma, as you've explained to me with law enforcement. The family unit also suffers. So
Absolutely.
before an officer gets there, kind of to the low point in this model, you're able to actually reach them by recognizing the symptoms.
Correct. That's I call that the interception,
Mhm.
because that will happen between uh, anywhere between 3 to 5 years. That's a crucial time in an officer's career, because you can really pull them out if you catch it right. So 3 to 5 years into the profession is when you start seeing some of those subtle signs of dysfunctional behavior. And you have to have a trained eye to see it, because as I described it earlier, we're normal people that often find ourselves in abnormal circumstances. And because of those abnormal circumstances, we begin to behave in a very abnormal way, and that becomes normal. So dysfunctional behavior is really normal behavior to an untrained eye. But when the eye is trained based on the information learned from the Enneagram about stress points, then you can see that this person's nervous system is under attack and will be eventually hijacked if you don't intercede right now. And so the relationship is very important at this point. There's a little book I always introduce to my participants. It's a small, easy read. It's a religious book, and it's called The Way of the Shepherd. It's 7 easy leadership principles around. It helps you with every aspect of your life. It's the story is told in a parable. It's really about uh, a shepherd taking care of sheep, and how he knows each one of those animals intimately. He knows them inside and out. And so it's really important in our profession for a police officer, a leader, to really intimately know his police officers. That's the only way you're going to be able to intercede when you see what you see and believe what you believe.
Mhm. So I just want to appreciate that you're coming into this with your heart online and a lot of compassion and empathy for what officers are facing, and at the same time, a strong accountability for their actions out in the world.
Right.
It's not that you're going easy on anybody. You used a compassionate accountability, I think, is what you've talked about in the past.
Absolutely.
And you actually inspired me to read Man's Search for Meaning, which is Viktor Frankl's book. And there's one quote that you share from Viktor Frankl often, And I think it perfectly illustrates what you're helping officers understand. Can you share that quote?
Here, between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space is where the power resides. And so, what I tell officers to do, especially the leader, you have to create that space for the officer to be able to step into so that you can heal him or begin to work to heal him. But that space is also a space for our community to step into so that there can be reconciliation between the community and the police, and we will rid ourselves of civil unrest. But again, as you stated up front, this is a very difficult process. I am so passionate about police officers, but I'm as passionate about the community. But I know that if you have a police officer that is where his or her nervous system is hijacked, he's going to create havoc in that community. And that's not fair to our community because our community gave us the power to do so. I can speak to that police officer. Why? Because I've lived that life for 40 years. So there's mental health issues over there, Evan, in policing that we don't talk about. But there's mental health issues in the community. And we are beginning, and one of the beautiful things that have come out of all of this pandemic and the civil unrest is that we are beginning to recognize the importance of addressing mental health issues in all facets of society.
Thank goodness. It needs to be so. And I just appreciate the work that you're doing out there for both parties, you know. So I'm going to shift a little bit. We have several questions that participants would like you to answer. First question is, how can I help my social 6 police officer husband relax his nervous system when he gets triggered from past trauma and explodes or implodes in the home environment, both in the moment and as well as any other resources you have? P.S. He's watching right now and finding this extremely helpful.
Yes, for me, I'm a social 6 myself. And what I need is I need people to stand there in the gap with me and either validate what I am believing or make sure that you give me facts to show me that what I believe and feel isn't true. Because one of the things that we will do is project our feelings, thoughts, and actions on others. And we can change the complexity of an environment if we are dysregulated. And so first, there must be trust between all parties. And so if the trust is there, you can really speak into the space of a 6. Why? Because we're so loyal to the people that we truly, there's an endearing between the individuals. So I hope that answered her question.
Well, one thing you've shared with me too, Mike, is straight talk.
Yes.
You'd rather know something. So if I'm withholding or afraid to tell you the truth, that's going to further cause some anxiety.
Exactly. Thank you for that, because I don't care how messy it is. I want the truth. And the way I define straight talk is be honest, let people know where you stand, use simple language. Don't spin the truth and don't leave false impressions. Why? Because one of the things about a 6 is that we have a very good bullshit detector, pardon my French. And when someone is blowing smoke, we know it. So be honest. And the thing about 6s also is if we don't trust you, we can't even talk to you. We will pull away from you because you have violated the very thing that I hold near and dear, and that's trust.
Sacred territory for a type 6. Yeah. Second question. Thank you for sharing the story of how you got curious about the Enneagram. Have you found that people get big unconscious blocks if the Enneagram, odd sounding word, is introduced too early?
Yes, I've experienced that in policing, and because we don't trust, if you're not a police officer, you have no value to us coming in trying to teach us anything. So when I first, and perhaps that's why Rick Bradstreet, when he introduced it to us, he didn't call it the Enneagram. He called it nothing. He just started talking about personalities and stress points and security points. And so what I began to do is when I introduced it the first time, I called it DNA, because everyone can recognize the importance of DNA, and especially in policing, there are words that resonates with us. And so I use the word DNA. And once I did that, my God, they just gravitated towards it and couldn't let it go. In fact, while I'm teaching, during breaks, they're sending emails and text messages to their spouses, asking their spouse to take the test. So when they go home, they have conversations, and the next day they come back to class and they're talking about their spouse is this, their spouse is that, and this revelation that occurs within the family. It's amazing what the thing does.
That's amazing. Third question. Mike, I was so glad to hear you bring out that society authorizes the police to carry out the police functions as the deputy of society, instead of the people using force individually. If the society does not assert a monopoly on the use of force, violence tends to lead to cycles of revenge killings. Do you have any thoughts on how people can be educated about this?
Well, crime isn't a police problem. It's a community problem. And back in 1829, there's a guy by the name of Sir Robert Peel who said that the police are the public and the public are the police. The only difference between the two is that the police are paid to give 24 hours attention to what's incumbent upon every citizen. And it's our responsibility as police officers to educate the community about the things that we supposed to be providing service to them for. Here's the problem, is that every ill within society, they have given to the police departments to handle. We are not equipped to do so. And so the expectation from the community towards the police, they really set us up for failure in a big way. There's so much reform that need to take place within a police department, but I don't think defunding the police is necessary. I think reallocation of funds within a police department to provide more training around the soft skills and the things that we're talking about today is what's most important, because in a democratic society, we cannot function without our police.
Mm-hmm. And I want to kind of clarify, when you say we're set up to fail, this is kind of a shift of closing kind of services that would be provided to people having a mental health crisis, and instead calling the police to handle that.
Yes.
So here in Nashville, our sheriff, who we've both met with the chief of, deputy, our sheriff runs on this platform of decriminalizing mental health. So rather than building a larger jail, he actually built a mental health screening facility. So this is kind of something you're pointing to, is there's so much responsibility and expectation that society has. And most of us, private citizens, have a blind eye to that. We don't understand how much the scales have tipped there.
No clue. In a lot of ways, when a mother child refused to go to school, the police, we're called. When someone's cat run up a tree, they call the police. And so we're not equipped to handle those types of things. So what's required here is some deprogramming and reprogramming as to how to effectively and efficiently use 911 for 911 purposes, so that police officers and what they are trained to do are able to do it. Now, some of the things that are out there about reform, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that there should be oversight, citizen oversight over police departments. Now, if there are police officers on this call, I don't know if there are, and if there are many. Most of my police buddies will not agree with that at all. But there need to be oversight, community oversight over what we do. I'm not saying that they need to have power to tell us what to do, but they definitely need to have power to see what we do and give suggestions as to how we should go about performing our duties that they have given us to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Another question. I am a psychologist and Enneagram teacher and have recently started working with the police in Australia, 3 weeks in. I am charged with helping change the culture here in New South Wales. Where would you start in helping bring about a change in the culture to bring more heart and self-awareness?
Wow. That question is a very deep question. Well, you got to get the attention of the organizational leaders. That is the only way you're going to penetrate that profession wherever you are. You got to get the attention of a passionate person who understands when you talk about the three systems that I introduced earlier, the administrative system, the operational system. We do that part very well. But where we fail is the human system. And you have to get them to understand the importance of the human system. And if you can get them to see that, I think you can begin your journey of healing policing in your country.
Wonderful. Okay, next question. What can we as civilians do to contribute to a positive future relationship with police and other forms of authority? And a related question, I'll tack this on. How do we support Mike in this incredible work? Are there ways to bring this program to our communities?
Well, the first part is you have to engage with police. You have to find programs to where you could volunteer so that you can get to understanding the subculture of policing and recognize that what you see isn't always actual and factual. Although you see video of what you see, there's a whole, so let me back up. There's no way I'm defending any action of a police officer. I am extremely hard on my police officers when they do things that they should not do. Even down to the point of being rude, because the rudeness is a start. That's the gateway. And when you go back to the stages of development on that cycle, that rudeness start happening in stage 2. When you see that, those are subtle signs of dysfunctional behavior. And you need to start addressing it early. But number one is, yes, you have to figure out ways of getting involved with the police department. If you are in a business, you invite police officers to your business so that your police officers can educate your staff or the people you work with about policing. And that gives you an opportunity to ask questions about the police department. And slowly but surely, you will find your way involved in the life of a police officer in police departments. And then you can be a voice for them. And because here's what's really important is we need to make that connection back between the police and the community. What you are actually seeing is a drift away. Back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, you saw a lot of, and I was around the country teaching community policing to society and police officers at the same time. I was teaching ethics and integrity issues around police officers and their behavior with citizens in the same room. What a profound discussions that took place in those situations. But I hope that answered. That's a deep question.
It does. There are a couple practical things that you suggested, just practical steps to begin kind of taking steps and moving closer to your local policing agency. What about the second part of that question? How do people support you? And what about bringing this program to their community, wherever they're located?
Well, Evan, you have all my contact information. So if whoever the person that asked the question want me to come that area, just let me know and be more than happy.
Well, let's go ahead and give them your email address, Mike.
Okay. Mike.Alexander at lion, Lion, strategy dot group.
Mm-hmm.
Mike.Alexander at lionstrategy.group.
And I know from working with you, Mike, you're highly responsive. I think that big heart and that compassionate insight really drives you to meet the need where you're able to. But Lion Institute's growing, and you're engaging with people all over the country. So don't hesitate to email Mike if you have any questions or interested in bringing this program to your town. Okay, next question.
Yes, ma'am.
Many communities are calling for separating out the social service aspects of policing and giving those to trained social service professionals. Do you think it's a good idea, or might further exaggerate the focus of police on the negative rather than helping aspect of the profession?
No, I think that's actually a good idea, to be quite frank. Some of the social services that have been given to police officers should not be given to police officers. But if they're going to give us those items, then they need to train us to be able to effectively and efficiently handle those things, which will require police academies that are now 6 months long to be at least a year and a half long. You know, in other countries, like I'm working with a particular country right now, their academies are like 3 years long. But when they come out, they are highly efficient, equipped to be able to effectively and efficiently use force the proper way. But they also understand that de-escalation is primary, and use of force, not excessive force, but using force is only when necessary. And then the social services, they partner with those entities to work with them instead of being the responder to those issues. So I actually agree that those things should be reallocated to where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And again, to your point, reallocating money that flows through a police agency in a proper direction, not defunding the police, but putting money where it needs to go.
We spend too much time on the hard skills instead of the soft skills. And so my last job at the Austin PD, I was in charge of what they call continuing education and the Leadership Command College. And those are all soft skills. And then my counterpart, another supervisor on the other side of the hall, had learned skills. That was the defensive tactics, the running, jumping, shooting, and all of that kind of stuff. Where I am trying to get students in my class, he had a waiting list. You see? So, and that's because where we have put our emphasis on SWAT and all of the warrior type things instead of the emotional intelligence components that we really need to embrace.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is a cultural problem, no matter if you're inside or outside of an agency. Our entire culture in America needs to shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for your time. Good questions, everyone. Again, Mike, why don't you give the website address for Lion Institute in case people want to follow your work?
Okay, there's www.thelion.institute. And that's it. No .com, no .org. It's www.thelion.institute. And you will find all of the information there.
And Evangeline, who's hosting this experience, just dropped your website into the chat box. There's another question that I want to get to because we have time. And this is probably the last question we'll take. A participant asked, how does your understanding of the Enneagram support you in your experience as a Black man working in the criminal justice system? How do you respond to bias in the profession?
I don't even know if I'm equipped to handle that question, to be quite frank. Wow. That's a painful question, to be quite frank, because I've experienced a lot. Um, there was a time I hated police. I really, truly hated the police as a migrant worker and what I experienced in dealing with the police. But as I began to understand police officers, it wasn't totally their fault. They didn't know what they didn't know, and their nervous systems were under attack. But that doesn't answer your question about the racism. I've seen it. It is systemic within policing, and some of my cohorts would not agree with that either. But how in the world can it not be if our society has it? And police officers come from where the general population, and they bring their core values and guiding principles with them in the profession. And I just have learned to confront it head on when I see it. I don't just let it go, but I don't attack it. Um, I try my best, first and foremost, to build a relationship with the person who are saying or doing things, because I'm not going to make the assumption that the person is intentionally being racist towards me. If he is a police officer, then I try my best to get close as I possibly can to him or her so we can have a conversation. There's a great book, couple of them. One is called Crucial Conversation, and the other one is Crucial Confrontation. And, you know, you put your information in that pool of meaning. In other words, I state where I am and how painful what your comments were to me, how they made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of asking questions like, why did you say that? I just simply turned it on me and said, you know, when you said blah, 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 that was really hurtful. And can you help me to understand why or what you meant by that? That way I don't make any assumptions. But, you know, I look forward now to those conversations. But this whole civil unrest thing really triggered me. And it took me back to a time, a really dark time in my life of experiencing racism as a young Black male and not understanding at the time what was going on. And I'm watching my kids now are really, one of them is really struggling. I mean, like no other. With all of this stuff. And it's just a great opportunity for me to really have really deep conversations around the issues. And things have to get worse sometimes before they get better. You know, I hate George Floyd was no saint, but what he was and what he became is a sacrificial lamb that created this space to have these conversations that we have avoided for a lifetime.
Many lifetimes, many generations. So thank you for sharing, Mike. And in that moment of answering that question, you're modeling something for all of us. So you have my deepest respect and deepest gratitude for what you've invested your life in.
Thank you.
I feel very teary-eyed. If you want to stay in touch with Mike, and please do, he's constantly facilitating conversations with individuals who are really standing at the forefront of this context we're talking about, this discussion that is ongoing.
Yeah, I'm also on LinkedIn, and we're doing a series of webinars around clearing the pathway to healing and policing in America. We've done 3 so far. We have another one coming up in late September around de-escalation. So I have 5 or 6 panelists I know I have several from Florida, some from Atlanta, Georgia. They're all over the place. And we're going to have a discussion around clearing the space for healing and policing in America through the importance of how to de-escalate. There's a young lady out of Pittsburgh by the name of Carrie O'Donnell who does phenomenal work, just like Marion, around the nervous system. She will be on that panel as well. She's the person on that panel, and she's phenomenal. And so if you guys are interested in that, please tune in for that. Just look follow us on LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn, and you can tune into that webinar. It's free also. That one
Great.
is.
Great. Yes. So thank you so much. If you want to stay in touch with me, my website's evanbarbie.com, and my email address is evan@evanbarbie.com. I'm currently chair, as I said, of the programming committee. We're really trying to move in T&E as an organization to be really responsive and help people kind of highlight individuals like Chief Mike, who've taken the Enneagram and are really changing culture. So kind of the more application focused practice in addition to the educational training that TNE already offers. So evan@evanbarbie.com is my email address. You're welcome to send me emails and suggestions for things you'd like to see in the future. TNE has moved all of their trainings online. So you can see a full list of educational trainings that have been moved online, and to great effect. Apparently participants in the Zoom trainings report the same kind of depth of teaching that they experienced in the in-person meeting. So that's very exciting that the Enneagram doesn't lose its depth even when we move to online trainings. If you're not a member for TNE, I'd highly recommend that you join at $60 a month, and you get a free gathering every month with Terry Saraceno, which is just a good chance for you to plug into a community of people who are really dedicated towards transforming the world and bringing kind of more compassion online. We have a follow-up webinar that's scheduled for August 18th. This will be facilitated by Renee Rosario and Satoya Foster, and it's on this conversation, focused on this conversation of how to use the Enneagram for mindfulness and social change. So tune into that. It's a donation-based experience. We want as many people to join as possible. And then I forgot to mention this in the initial, when we first got started, Mike, because I was running through your bio, you are also a board member for TNE. And I just want to call that out because you're one of the newer members and you're making a big impact, and you're also the first individual on the board who's been invited to share with the world what you do. So thank you for making time for us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We send you all our best.
Thank you. Pray for me.
Everyone for joining.
Hotbed, so just keep me in your prayers.
We certainly will. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.